We'll move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My questions to the Prime Minister. Australians are questioning the competence of this Prime Minister, knowing he's clearly not across the detail of decisions which he's making which adversely affect the lives of Australians. Economic decisions have resulted in prices going up and up. Energy policy is a disaster with power prices going up and up. The $450 million referendum was against advice and resulted in our country being divided. Will the Prime Minister apologise to the Australian people?
Order. The Treasurer will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
It is interesting to get a question from the Leader of the Opposition about division. The Leader of the Opposition has never seen a policy that he doesn't oppose. He's opposed all of the measures that we've put in place, and we've put in place a few in recent times. In recent times, we passed the Housing Australia Future Fund through the Parliament, unlocking $10 billion in investments in social and affordable housing, opposed by those opposite. The government committed a further $1 billion for public and community housing, opposed by those opposite. I went to Whyalla, looking at the transition which is occurring in the steel industry there, moving towards green hydrogen, producing green steel, announcing, along with the South Australian Government, the upgrade of Port Bonython to assist in that process. We hosted the National Disaster Preparedness Summit here, contrasting with what occurred in the lead-up to 2019, where the attitude was nothing to see here. Nothing to see here. We had the first time that has ever happened, hosted here in this parliament, bringing together key stakeholders, including from federal, state and territory emergency services, logistics, food and groceries, utilities and the non-government sector. We've released the Employment White Paper, mapping the future for good jobs, skills and training in Australia, and we'll have more to say about that later today. We announced projects from the $2 billion Social Housing Accelerator with the Victorian and the New South Wales governments. We've opened and announced new urgent care clinics, now operating, serving people, keeping people out of emergency departments, giving them health care they need when they need it with just their Medicare card, not their credit card.
Order.
We secured the release and safe return to Australia of journalist Chang Lei. Yeah. Chang Lei now reunited with her family, her two wonderful daughters and her family.
Order.
During recent times, we attended the ASEAN and East Asia Summit in Indonesia with our most important of friends, promoting prosperity and stability in our region. I was the first Prime Minister in 2 decades to visit the Philippines and elevate our relationship with the strategic partnership. And at the G20 in India, we advocated for Australia's interests in clean energy and economic resilience. Australia once again being around the chamber.
Order. Members on my left will cease interjecting. Far too much noise. I want to hear from the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, following Saturday's referendum on the Voice to Parliament, what is the Prime Minister's message to Australia about the results?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for Lingiari for her question and for her extraordinary work in representing remote communities in Central Australia, in Arnhem Land, in places like Wadeye and other communities. Communities where we see the massive gap that exists between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australia. Now, the referendum on Saturday was not the result that I'd hoped for, but I respect the decision and the democratic process that produced it. We can make in this country the big decisions peacefully and as equals. We know that referendums are hard. That's why only 8 of 45 have passed, none without bipartisan support. And I certainly accept responsibility for the decisions that I have taken. This was a constitutional change asked for, requested, an invitation from Indigenous Australians. I accepted that invitation and I followed through on the commitments that I made.
Order.
Australians did not accept the constitutional change that was proposed, but no one is arguing for the status quo. No one can say that just keeping doing the same thing is good enough for Australia. What has occurred in recent times is now a much greater national awareness. We need to channel that into a national purpose to find the answers. The referendum was about listening to people and about getting better outcomes. And these principles will continue to guide me. I will continue to listen to people and to communities and consult on Indigenous Australians about a way forward. Because the issues that we sought to address have not gone away, and nor have the people of goodwill and good heart who want to address them. We will address them with hope in our heart, with faith in each other and with kindness towards one another, walking together in a spirit of unity and healing. The great Australian story goes back some 65,000 years. We have an opportunity as parliamentarians to write the next chapter. As government, we have a responsibility to write the next chapter as well. A chapter that sees the gap closing, because we know that only 4 out of 19 targets are on track as we speak. Australians know, that is not good enough, and that is why we must seek to achieve that change.
Concluded. Call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister and concerns his divisive and incompetently managed referendum.
Order. Members on my right. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition has the call and will start her question again and will be heard in silence.
My question is to the Prime Minister and concerns his divisive and incompetently managed referendum. Why did the Prime Minister, in the words of the member for Macarthur, focus on, quote, inner-city elites? Why did he refuse to hold a constitutional convention? Why did he make no effort to achieve bipartisanship? Why did he waste $450 million of taxpayers' money?
Order.
Mr.
Members
Speaker.
on my right. The member for Cooper is warned. Order. Members on my right. I can't hear the question. You mightn't like what the question is, but I've got to hear it. And the Deputy Leader of the Opposition will now be heard in silence again. If there is one interjection, people will leave the chamber. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition, out of courtesy, will have her question read again.
My question is to the Prime Minister and concerns his divisive and incompetently managed referendum. Why did the Prime Minister, in the words of the member for Macarthur, focus on, quote, inner-city elites? Why did he refuse to hold a constitutional convention? Why did he make no effort to achieve bipartisanship? Why did he waste $450 million of taxpayers' money? And why did he proceed when it was clear his vanity project was going so disastrously wrong?
The Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition for her rhetoric.
The member for O'Connor.
Let's be very clear here about what occurred. There was a constitutional convention.
Order.
There was one established under the former government in 2017. After a process that the former government established under Tony Abbott, when he established a process, a working group who were charged with coming back to the Australian people about what form constitutional recognition should take. That was after John Howard, of course, and every other leader since, promised to promote constitutional recognition. Now, in 2017—
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The member for O'Connor, I've mentioned a number of times, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition was heard in silence. I'm asking the same courtesy to be given to the Prime Minister. You'll leave the chamber under 94A. It's pretty simple. Prime Minister will have the call and be heard in silence.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. After a process in 2017, First Nations people, through the Uluru Statement from the Heart, those eloquent 440 words, issued an invitation to Australians to walk with them on the form of recognition they sought, which was recognition through a voice. There were then processes established, including under the former government, the Calma-Langton report and other processes, the Joint Committee chaired by Patrick Dodson and Julian Leeser to progress this issue. I said before the election on a range of occasions, as did both leaders, Scott Morrison and Bill Shorten prior to 2019, that there would be advance on these issues. I was at Garma when the Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Ken Wyatt, said that there would be a referendum held. I was there in 2019. And what occurred? What occurred was that I fulfilled that commitment that I made. This wasn't out of convenience.
Member for Bowman.
It was out of conviction, because I believe that when you make a commitment, including a commitment to Indigenous people, that it should be fulfilled. And I make this point, that across remote areas where dominated by Indigenous communities, yes, recorded massive support. Wadair 92%, Tiwis 84%, Maningrida 88%, Mornington Island 78%, Yarrabah 76%, Palm Island 74%, Leonora 79%. Now,
Order.
the
Prime Minister's
fact is,
time
it did not get
has concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government working with the states and territories to ensure Australians have access to the skills they need for jobs of the future after a wasted decade?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question. After a decade where those neglected, opposite and hollowed out Australia's skills sector, leaving us with shortages across the country, we've made investing in skills a national priority, making sure that Australians have the skills that they need to get good jobs. It's good for Australians, good for the economy and good for our future. Prior to the election, we committed to create Jobs and Skills Australia, to identify what the jobs of the future would be and make sure Australians were skilled up for them, whether that be through TAFE or university or some other form of training. And it's why, arising from the Jobs and Skills Summit as well, held last year, we have now committed to 480,000 fee-free TAFE places. 180,000 we committed to this year, and in fact we not only have met that target, we've exceeded it substantially. 214,000 places taken up already. We are delivering on the Employment White Paper by investing in TAFE centres of excellence. These will increase the collaboration between universities and the vet sector and deliver the skills and knowledge our economy requires. We will make sure that we can deliver for the workforce needs of the future in aged care, clean energy, manufacturing and construction. We're improving foundation skills delivery, because 1 in 5 adults have alarming gaps in literacy, numeracy and digital literacy. And we're lifting apprenticeship completion rates, supporting more women, First Nations people and people from a range of backgrounds to access apprenticeships. We're working with the states, because we know when it comes to TAFE and skills, we have to work with states and Territories. And that is precisely what we're doing. And this evening the National Cabinet will be meeting to progress the next stage in our new National Skills Agreement, something we've been working on over weeks and months, and something that over the past fortnight I've had one-on-one discussions with every Premier and Chief Minister across the states and territories. And I want to pay tribute as well to the Minister, who has done such an extraordinary job in driving this agenda that will hopefully be completed this evening with a forward-looking agenda to take us years ahead, because this is an essential component of economic growth and of making sure that we have an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
Calls the honourable member for Clark.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for the Environment. Minister, we've heard that the Antarctic Division overspent by $42 million while winding back important science programs. Also that our new icebreaker can't refuel in Hobart, and that the just-released Macquarie Point plan shows its Antarctic facilities zone will be about as big as 2 shoeboxes and not exclusively dedicated to Antarctic purposes. Minister, when will the government get serious about protecting the frozen continent and honouring our international treaty obligation?
The call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thanks so much, and I want to thank the member for Clark for his question and reassure him, as a very active local member, that we are deadly serious about making sure that Hobart is the home to Antarctic science and that Australia's Antarctic science continues to be world-class. The sad truth is that the former Liberal government was irresponsible in managing Australia's Antarctic program. And because of that, we've had 3 inquiries into the Antarctic Division, the recent Senate inquiry and before that the Nash and Russell inquiries. That's just in 18 months. Those inquiries uncovered the fact that there was very serious bullying and harassment in the Australian Antarctic Division, and we are working hard to clean up that mess. We also locked in significant long-term funding for the Australian Antarctic program. In fact, its budget is going up every year, year after year, for the next 3 years, and it's higher every year than it would have been under those opposite. Fixing the Antarctic program is a big job, but we're getting on with it. And as Mr Brian Miller said, who's a current employee of the division, he told the Senate inquiry earlier this month, "I believe the ship is turning. I feel like things are getting better slowly. 12 months ago I would not have appeared before this committee because I would have feared the repercussions." And he went on to say, "We know the importance of the work. We need some help to get back on track so we can do the important work we've been sent out to do." Mr Speaker, Labor is getting the Antarctic Division back on track. Our priority is supporting the critical science and permanent jobs that come with that in Tasmania, especially in Tasmania. Our Antarctic scientists are doing terrific research on the Denman Glacier, the million-year ice core, the ice cap, greenhouse gases in the southern atmosphere, and so much more. Now, the member asked about the Nuyina, the magnificent ship that's been built. The previous Minister for the Environment, the now Deputy Leader of the Opposition, was Minister when that ship was delivered. And what we have— oh, she's very proud of it, she interjects. Well, it can't sail under the bridge in Hobart, which means that it can't refuel in Hobart currently. And in fact, the ship, since it was delivered in 2021, has spent 18 months in dry dock. The budget overruns are because we've been having to rent vessels to replace the Nuyina because it's been in dry dock for 18 months since it was delivered. So I understand the concerns of the member for Clark. We're fixing up the mess that those opposite left us, but we are absolutely determined to make sure that world-class science stays in Hobart and that we continue our international obligations in Antarctica.
Give the call to the honourable member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering on its commitment to provide Australians with the skills they need for the careers and opportunities of the future? And what has been the response to the government's policies?
Call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Thank the remarkable member for Dunkley and good friend, and can I thank her for the question, because it is true to say upon election we were faced with a very broad and deep skill shortage across the economy, across the labour market. In fact, we had many jobs that were in need of supply, in need of skills, in need of labour. The OECD had reported that we had the highest or second highest labour shortage per capita amongst OECD countries. We saw the occupations on the shortage list in 12 months go from 153 to 286 before election. So we were bequeathed a very significant skills shortage on top of course, the Liberal Party debt. And for that reason, we had to respond quickly. And can I thank the Prime Minister and the Treasurer for having the foresight to convene a Jobs and Skills Summit with very short notice, bringing together all governments, industry and unions, universities and the vet sector in order to ensure that we had a strategic plan to supply skills to our economy. That, of course, led to the first announcement in this sector to ensure that we had 180,000 fee-free TAFE places for 2023, and as the Prime Minister just indicated, we've exceeded that target. It's now at 215,000 places and climbing. That is 215,000 Australians enrolled in courses in areas of skills demand. That is what is, of course, most critical. And we understand that because the states and territories have such an important role in the vet sector, you have to collaborate. You have to bring them together. What is extraordinary is that in the 9 years they were in government, they did not have a long-term skills agreement with—
Order. The Minister will pause and resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, the standing orders are very clear. Ministers need to speak about matters for which they are responsible. The question concerned the government's commitment and what's been the response. The question did not concern matters of history, and the minister should be directed back to the question.
The Minister for the Environment and Water will cease interjecting. I'm just going to ask the Minister to return back to the question. He was not asked about previous governments, and ask him to return to the topic.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Well, I'm glad to say that we put together agreement amongst all of the governments because we were without an agreement before the election. We were without an agreement before the election. We needed to bring those governments together, and that's what we did, Speaker. And we did so to the benefit of students, to the benefit of workers, to the benefit of businesses, to the benefit of our economy, and we'll continue to do more. As the Prime Minister indicated at the National Cabinet's meeting this evening, to make sure we continue this strategic investment in the skills that are needed. If we're going to transform the energy sector, we need skills. If we're going to enliven manufacturing through the National Reconstruction Fund, we need skills. If we're going to supply the labour and skills for our care economy, we have to have the right investment advised by Jobs and Skills Australia. So we'll continue to do more in ensuring we supply skills to workers, to students and to businesses, because without doing that, we'll continue the failure by those opposite in leaving so many areas across our labour market in short supply.
Give a call to the honourable member for Hume.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Recent IMF analysis found that Australians lead the world in mortgage paying a higher share of their income on mortgage payments than any other advanced economy. Why has the Prime Minister been solely focused on his divisive Canberra Voice proposal rather than dealing with the surging cost of living pressures facing Australian families?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I get it. I get a question from the Shadow Treasurer because he's incapable of asking a question of the Treasurer. Poor Jim, he'll be bringing in his doona in here, bringing in a pillow. Just waiting to get a question about the economy. And I'm asked about the IMF, Mr Speaker. And I did see some figures from the IMF. Because the IMF, according to their figures, found that in 2023, Australia is expected to have the fourth strongest budget balance as a share of GDP among the entire G20 countries. Fourth.
Order. The member for Hume
ahead of Germany ahead of Japan, ahead of the UK and ahead of the United States. Now, what did we inherit in 2021, you ask? Maybe. I'm asked from behind.
What did we inherit?
We were 15th in 2021. 15th down to 4th. You ask about the IMF. You ask about the IMF.
Order. Prime Minister will pause. The Minister for Home Affairs will cease interjecting so I can hear the point of order.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. I asked about the cost of living pressures bearing down on Australia.
The question began with IMF analysis about economic data. I'm just going to listen to the Prime Minister carefully. I don't think there was a specific time or reference you made in the question, but I'll listen to the Prime Minister carefully. He has the call.
But I'm happy to. The IMF was what the question was about, but I'm happy as well to talk about what we've done on cost of living, because all of it has something in common. It was targeted, and it was effective, and it's being rolled out. Our cost of living measures, cheaper childcare that began on July 1, cheaper medicines that began on January 1, the first component, and then the 60-day dispensing, opposed by those opposite.
Order.
Our energy price relief plan that they voted against, $3 billion that they voted against.
Petrie.
Affordable and social housing that they voted against. The idea of housing supply they voted against. All of the strengthening of the social safety net that we've put in place as well. Every measure opposed by those opposite. As part of our very clear plan as well. But there's something else we've done to take pressure off inflation, and that is to turn around the $78 billion deficit that those left and turn that into a $22 billion surplus. A $100 billion turnaround. The biggest nominal improvement in Australian history. And this is what S&P Global had to say. The improvement in fiscal outcomes is a key factor in our AAA ratings because it will reduce the government's annual borrowing needs and provide a buffer to absorb future economic shocks. Those opposite apparently think that inflation has nothing to do with cost of living, is what the interjections are saying.
The member for New England. I'd like to hear from the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What are the key elements of the Albanese Labor government's employment white paper, and what approaches did the government reject?
I give the call. The member for Fadden will not interject before an answer has even begun. Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Thanks to the wonderful member for Werriwa for her question. Mr Speaker, even as we campaigned in the referendum, even with everything that's going on around the world, this government has maintained a primary focus on jobs and wages and the cost of living. And the work that the Skills Minister has been doing with his state and territory colleagues and with the Prime Minister reflects that primary focus. And the employment white paper that I released with a bunch of colleagues 3 weeks ago today reflects that primary focus as well, Mr Speaker. The white paper and the work of the Skills Minister, the work of the Prime Minister and the government is all about finding great jobs and great opportunities for more Australians and finding better trained workers for employers so that we can all prosper together, Mr Speaker. And that's what the employment white paper was all about, helping Australians make the most of the big shifts underway in our economy and our society so that they can be beneficiaries and not victims of those changes. And Working Future, which is the name of the white paper, presents a vision for a more dynamic and inclusive labour market and when everyone has an opportunity for a job and where businesses and communities can be beneficiaries of change and thrive, Mr Speaker. Now, we start this task from a strong position when it comes to the labour market. Since monthly records were started to be kept in 1978, a good year, Mr Speaker, since then there's only been 18 months with unemployment with a 3 in front of it, and 15 of those months have been under this Prime Minister. More than 500,000 jobs created under our government, a record for a new government in this country, Mr Speaker. It took those opposite more than 3 years to create more than 500,000 jobs. Now, the White Paper, Mr Speaker, was about 5 things: full employment, it was about job security and strong wages, it was about reigniting productivity growth after the failures of those opposite, it's about overcoming barriers to employment and broadening opportunity, and it's about building a skilled and adaptable workforce along the lines of the work of the Prime Minister and the Skills Minister over recent weeks and indeed over recent days as well. And the White Paper outlined not just what we're doing but what we intend to do with 31 future reform directions and a bunch of new policies, including TAFE Centres of Excellence, the Skills Passport and more, Mr Speaker. Now, those opposite made deliberately stagnant wages were a deliberate design feature of their approach to the economy. They oversaw the worst decade for productivity in the last half-century, Mr Speaker, and that's because they are long on nasty negativity, but they are short of anything positive to say about the future of our economy, the future of our people or the future of our country.
Order. There is far too much noise in the chamber. Order. If that noise continues, people will leave the chamber. Give the call to the honourable member for Durack.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister committed to Makarrata truth-telling and treaty?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. What I'm committed to post the referendum is respecting what Indigenous people have said. And what they have said is that they are undertaking a week, which is reasonable for them to deal with what for many people, regardless of what white people voted in this referendum, I think it would be acknowledged that for many people, such as the women who I sat with, the Anungu leadership, who I sat in the red dirt of Uluru with last week, it will be a difficult time for them. And I think that should be respected. One of the things about this issue is that I have sought to grant agency to Indigenous Australians to accept the invitation that they offered, that they worked through, that they had hundreds of meetings involving thousands of people about. Now, the voice was, with constitutional recognition, was important. Makarrata is simply a Yolngu word for coming together after struggle. I think it's a good thing that people come together, and I made that very clear on Saturday night that that is my position. I think that that is a reasonable thing to say, and in terms of where we go from here, I note that there's been a change of position again from the opposition when it comes to constitutional recognition.
Order.
And the Leader of the Opposition said during this process in September, we went to the last election and a number of elections before that with that as our policy, and that will be our policy going into the next and again.
Order.
I think it's right and respectful to recognise Indigenous Australians in the Constitution. Just think about that. They went to a number of elections with this as a promise. If only they'd been elected in 2016 and 2019,
Prime Minister,
they might have fulfilled it.
As the Prime Minister concluded his answer. The Manager of Opposition is on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, on relevance, a very tight question. Is the Prime Minister committed to Makarrata truth and treaty? He should either answer that or he should be directed to sit down.
The order. The Prime Minister will return to the question.
Mr Speaker, and today the Leader of the Opposition has now taken the next step He's now opposing himself. He's now saying he's opposed to holding a constitutional recognition. The Leader of the Opposition is all trailer, no movie. All trailer, no movie. He never actually sticks to a commitment, which is why he doesn't recognise conviction when he sees it in someone else.
Order. The House comes to order. I'll hear from the member for Lyons.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. What were the findings of the Nixon report, and how is the Albanese Labor government acting to clean up the serious issues of visa exploitation that it inherited?
Call to the Minister for Home Affairs and the Minister for Cybersecurity.
Speaker, can I thank the member for Lyons for his question and for his long-standing interest in this matter. In January this year, I asked former Police Chief Commissioner Christine Nixon to undertake a rapid review into the exploitation of Australia's visa system. And, Speaker, what this review found was utterly and truly shocking. Christine Nixon found that our migration system today has serious and systemic problems. She found that the system has been used to perpetrate some of the worst crimes that there are: sexual slavery, human trafficking, and that Australia, because of problems in our migration system, has actually become a target for organised crime around the world. Christine Nixon also found that the root causes of this problem were delay, dysfunction in our migration system, and almost a complete lack of enforcement of the rules of that system. She said, and I quote, "I've been appalled by the abuses of sexual exploitation, human trafficking and other organised crime that have been presented to me. It is clear that there are gaps and weaknesses in Australia's visa system that are allowing this to happen." Now, Speaker, we came to office with a migration system that was fundamentally broken, and we don't have to look far to the person who broke it. He's sitting opposite me in the Leader of the Opposition's chair. For almost all of the last decade, the opposition leader oversaw our immigration system, first as Minister for Immigration and Border Protection and later for Minister for Home Affairs. What really makes me angry about these abuses and exploitation, Speaker, is the fact that the opposition leader has self-styled himself as a tough man on the borders. When we actually look at the facts, what he did was cut compliance officers in our department in half.
The member for Deakin is warned.
Now, Speaker, it is not possible for anyone on the other side of politics to claim that they did not have great visibility of these problems. What we saw while they were in government was almost a report a year, including one done by one of the junior ministers in the portfolio during the time that they were in office, which detailed in great detail different issues that Christine Nixon found in her report. Now, the evidence was there. The opposition leader did nothing. Instead, he cut funding and made the problem worse. Now, Speaker, our government has a very different approach. We take these issues extremely seriously, and that is why just over a week ago we came forward with a comprehensive set of policies that will help the Australian government do a better job of doing this. Now, what was the response from the opposition leader when we came forward with these policies? Well, we didn't hear contrition, we didn't hear any taking of responsibility. What we heard instead was a bizarre array of the 7 stages of grief, and then we heard that he was either being accused of being too tough or too soft. That's not what we're accusing you of, Leader of the Opposition. What we're accusing you of is incompetence.
Order. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, your government has spent $450 million on a failed referendum, while the Yiparinya School in Alice Springs has been asking for just $12 million to provide accommodation for at-risk Indigenous children to help close the gap. Will the Prime Minister commit to this funding?
Order. Give the call to the Prime Minister. Order. Members on my left.
I thank the Leader of the National Party for his question, and I do note from the Leader of the Opposition that he's spoken about it being a waste to have a referendum. And there's a reason why the National Party perhaps have asked that rather than the Liberal Party, because the Leader of the Opposition committed during the recent referendum to hold another one. That's what he said. He stood up on multiple occasions, on the 11th of August, on the 3rd of September, on the 18th of September, and said his plan, put out there for all to see, was he wanted people to vote no in this referendum,
Member for Page.
then to have an election in which he was successful, and then to vote yes in another referendum. That's what he said on repeated times before people voted. Before people voted on Saturday,
Order.
he gave a solemn promise that he would support a second referendum being held. A second referendum being held. And then of course, the leader of the opposition as well was someone who presided over the 2014 budget he was involved with. And what did they do when they came into office? What did they do when it came to Indigenous health programs?
Order.
What?
The order. Look, there is far too much noise in the chamber. The Leader of the Nationals was heard in silence. There's constant interjecting. I can barely order. I haven't given the Leader of the Nationals the call. I just want to make the point. I can hear the questions, but I need to be able to hear the answers as well. The Leader of the Nationals on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, on relevance, it was a very tight question about Iparinya School and the funding with the Prime Minister commit, and I see that he's now been handed a note, so I'm sure that he's now been able to answer it.
Order. The Prime Minister in continuation will be heard in silence.
Speaker, we will, of course, take on any practical suggestions as we do, and we go through proper processes of funding. But the last time there was a change in government, in December 2013, with this Leader of the Opposition as Health Minister, the first thing they did was cancel a $777 million national partnership agreement on closing the gap on Indigenous health. $777 million.
Order.
Closing the gap on Indigenous health, a national partnership agreement that was in place, ripped out as part of that budget. They then, in 2014, refused to provide ongoing funding to 38 Aboriginal children and family centres. They cut $10 million from the National Family Violence Prevention and Legal Services Forum. They defunded the National Congress of Australia's First Peoples. They abolished the Prime Minister's Indigenous Business Policy Advisory Group. And in their first budget, they cut $165 million from Indigenous health programs. That's this bloke's record when it comes to Indigenous health. The bloke who walked out on the apology walked away from funding Indigenous programs.
Time has concluded. The member for Deakin and the member for Riverina will cease interjecting. So I can hear from the member for Lalor.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering on its election commitment to get wages moving for aged care workers and lift the standard of aged care in Australia?
Call to the Minister for Aged Care and Sport.
I thank the member for Lalor for her question. I recently visited Manor Court, Werribee, with the member for Lalor to talk with the aged care workers and residents who live there, most of whom she could personally introduce herself, such as her dedication as a local member, about the positive impact that our reforms in aged care are having on their day-to-day lives. The election of the Albanese Labor government was a watershed and uniting moment for people who care about the state of aged care in this country. They were desperate to see it improved, Mr Speaker.
Right.
And before the election, older Australians were scared about the prospects of going into an aged care home, with the Royal Commission exposing a shocking tale of neglect and of incompetence. Workers were undervalued and they were underpaid. Now, Labor heard these people. We listened. We promised to build a better, fairer future for the aged care sector, and now we are delivering. We funded a meaningful pay rise for aged care workers, a 15% increase in the minimum of the award. Under the Albanese government, personal care workers are now taking home up to $141 a week more, or $7,300 a year more. registered nurses are now taking home up to $196 a week more, which amounts to about $10,000 a year more, Mr. Speaker. I have heard from workers who have relayed how that extra money means that they can now buy sport shoes for their kids and purchase long-needed hearing aids. But stronger wages are not just helping our aged care workers face the immense cost of living pressures, it is also leading to much better outcomes for the residents that they care for. I recently went for morning tea with the member for Higgins at Arcare Aged Herb in Malvern East, and there one of the residents, Colleen, actually pulled me aside to tell me how much she respected and appreciated her nurse, Amanda. Colleen told me how good Amanda is at her job and how much happier she is now that Amanda has come to the aged care sector and is caring for her. Maureen from the Gold Coast told me that her mum lives in aged care and she has noticed now that her mum is getting more one-to-one care because there are more workers on each shift that she is in to see. We also have data, Mr. Speaker, that shows since the election of the Albanese Labor government, older people in aged care are receiving an incredible additional 1.8 million minutes of care every single day. Wow. Let me state that again, 1.8 million additional care minutes every single day. Wow. Mr. Speaker, the Albanese Labor government is delivering better outcomes for older people in aged care and for the very hard-working people that care for them.
Yeah. Excellent.
Call to the honourable member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment. Minister, when will you stop approving new coal and gas projects?
Order. The call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thank you.
Order.
It's the only time I get positive interjections from those opposite. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member for his question, and I want to remind him of the strong new climate safeguard laws that we introduced on this side, that we negotiated with you and with others on the crossbench, that this parliament passed some time ago, that say that coal and gas projects must comply with Australia's commitment to reaching net zero. We are approving more renewable energy projects than ever before. Just this week, our government approved, or just last week, the government approved the biggest battery project in Asia, one of the largest in the world. The week before that, it was a massive new solar farm in Queensland that will produce enough power to power 200,000 homes. That's a city the size of Townsville. In fact, we have ticked off about 37 renewable energy projects since coming to government. We've got about another 103 in the pipeline. This is an enormous transformation of our energy sector. It is an enormous transformation, bigger than anything since the Industrial Revolution. And I want to remind the member that you were part of designing this. I mean, together we designed the safeguard mechanism. We voted for it, you voted for it, we got it through the parliament because we are all committed to reaching, well, not all of us, sorry, we are all committed to reaching net zero. You want to do it, we want to do it. That's why we are approving these renewable energy projects. It's also, as well as our strong new climate laws, our target of net zero in law by 2050, our 43% emissions reduction target by 2030, our 82% renewable energy target by 2030. We've doubled the rate of renewable energy approvals. We've supported cheaper electric vehicles, higher fuel efficiency standards, massive upgrades to our energy transmission lines so that it can take the new solar and the new wind and the new hydro power. Help for homes and businesses to get off gas and onto electricity, $2 billion for green hydrogen. The reason we are doing all of this is because we know that we need to continue on a pathway to cheaper, cleaner, renewable energy powering our homes and businesses. It's better for family budgets, it's better for costs of businesses, and of course it's also much better for the environment.
Call to the honourable member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. After a decade of cuts and neglect, how is the Albanese Labor government working for Australia to strengthen Medicare and make medicines cheaper?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Hunter for his question. He's got a terrific record after just 17 months as a local member, delivering on the promises he made to his local community, particularly to strengthen Medicare and to deliver cheaper medicines. In particular, can I say, Mr Speaker, the member for Hunter promised to reinstate the nation-leading after-hours GP service in the Hunter, and he delivered it, along with his Hunter colleagues, the members for Paterson, Shortland and Newcastle. He promised to reinstate the right of general practices to recruit overseas trained doctors, a right that had been stripped away from the former government, and he's delivered on that promise as well, Mr Speaker. And during the election campaign, he stood with the Prime Minister back last May and promised to deliver a Medicare urgent care clinic in Cessnock. And 2 weeks ago, Mr Speaker, he was there at the opening of that Medicare urgent care clinic, already making it easier to see a doctor in his area, already taking pressure off local emergency departments. This is one of 25 urgent care clinics around the country already up and running. 58 will be up and running by the end of this calendar year, Mr Speaker. They're operating 7 days a week on extended hours, and they're available for walk-ins for patients who need urgent care for non-life-threatening emergencies. And of the 50,000 or so services already delivered by these clinics, Mr Speaker, around 1/3 have been delivered to kids under the age of 15, kids who fall off their skateboard, get a deep cut, and who otherwise would be sitting in the emergency department with their mums and dads for hour upon hour upon hour waiting for care, instead getting it quickly, Mr Speaker. 1/3 of the services have been delivered on the weekend when it's just so difficult to get a GP. So again, people end up in the emergency department. And importantly, Mr Speaker, every one of the services up until now and from now will be fully free of charge, fully bulk billed, because for Labor, bulk billing is the beating heart of Medicare, Mr Speaker. Now, I'm asked about neglect over the last decade, and I think Australians who pay attention to health policy understand that that commitment to bulk billing is not shared across this chamber. They remember when the Leader of the Opposition was the Health Minister, Mr Speaker, he said, and I quote, this is true, he said, "There are too many free Medicare services." They remember that he tried to abolish bulk billing altogether and make every single Australian, every pensioner, every child pay a fee for every single visit to the doctor. And then when he couldn't get that through, he froze the Medicare rebate for 6 long years, Mr Speaker. Well, Labor, the member for Hunter, everyone on this side is committed to boosting bulk billing, Mr Speaker, not abolishing it like the Leader of the Opposition tried to do.
Give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I seek leave to move the following motion. That the House condemns the Prime Minister for dividing Australians through his voice referendum.
Order.
B, failing to listen to all Australians. C, wasting over $450 million in taxpayer dollars. D, refusing to provide Australians with the detail on the voice. E, refusing to compromise in the national interest. And F, refusing to follow established referendum procedures. 2, is of the opinion that A, all Australians deserve the very best of what our nation has to offer, and that differences of opinion do not diminish our love for our country or our regard for each other. 3, therefore calls on the Prime Minister to support the Opposition's call for a Royal Commission into child sexual abuse in Indigenous communities. B, audit spending on Indigenous programs. And C, support practical policy ideas to improve the lives of Indigenous Australians to help close the gap.
Is leave granted?
Leave is not granted, Mr Speaker.
I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, I move that so much of the standing orders be suspended as would prevent the Leader of the Opposition from moving the following motion forthwith. That the House, 1, condemns the Prime Minister for A, dividing Australians through his voice referendum, B, failing to listen to all Australians, C, wasting over $450 million in taxpayer dollars, D, refusing to provide Australians with the detail on the voice, E, refusing to compromise in the national interest, F, refusing to follow established referendum procedures, 2, is of the opinion that A, all Australians deserve the very best of what our nation has to offer, and that differences of opinion do not diminish our love for our country or our regard for each other. 3, therefore calls on the Prime Minister to support the opposition's calls for a Royal Commission into child sexual abuse in Indigenous communities, B, audit spending on Indigenous programs, and C, support practical policy ideas to improve the lives of Indigenous Australians to help close the gap. Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister has taken our country unnecessarily down a path of division.
Will pause. I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
The great divider.
The Leader of the Opposition will just pause for a moment. Call the Leader of the House.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I'll require that this be dealt with at a later hour.
Order.
No.
Order. The Leader of the Opposition will just resume his seat so I can hear from the Leader of the House.
Commitments have already been made to members about the take-note debate on the resolution this morning, so I'll require that this be dealt with at 5:30 p.m.
Give a call. Order. Order. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. The House will come to order so I can hear from the member for Holt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What assistance is the Albanese Labor government providing for Australians under cost of living pressure, and what has been the opposition to this assistance?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What a wonderful member for Holt. Unlike the Shadow Treasurer, asked me questions about the cost of living, and that's because she understands, as does the whole government, that Australians are under substantial cost of living pressure, and that's why dealing with these pressures has been and will continue to be the primary focus of this government. Now, we understand, Mr Speaker, that inflation and interest rates were on the rise before we came to government, that the war on Ukraine has caused havoc on energy prices, and recent tensions in the Middle East have added to the uncertainty as well. And Australians are not immune from these global factors. They feel the pinch every time they fill up at the Bowser, Mr Speaker. Now, we know that inflation is moderating overall, but global challenges mean that it has become more persistent around the world, and it will unfortunately be more persistent here as well. And that's why our #1 priority remains and has been helping to deal with these cost of living pressures. Now, Mr Speaker, for those opposite who are interjecting, I will tell them at least 10 different ways that we are helping to address the cost of living pressures in our economy. We are rolling out $23 billion in cost of living support targeted to where it's needed most. Electricity bill relief, cheaper childcare, increased rent assistance, more Medicare bulk billing, cheaper medicines, boosting income support, fee-free TAFE training, building more affordable homes, expanding paid parental leave, and getting wages moving again after a decade of wage stagnation. Now, we've done all of this, Mr Speaker, at the same time as we've delivered the first budget surplus in 15 years. We've seen wages grow at their fastest rate in a decade, and we've seen more than 500,000 jobs created in our economy, which is a record for a new government in this country, Mr Speaker. We are making vital investments in our people and in our economy. We are laying the foundations for the future, and our efforts to repair the budget are taking pressure off inflation when inflation is most problematic. We are working for Australia, Mr Speaker, to help people with cost of living pressures, to get wages moving again, and our plan for $23 billion of cost of living relief makes that clear, Mr Speaker. Now, if those opposite really cared about cost of living pressures, they wouldn't have voted against our energy bill relief. If they really cared about cost of living pressures, they wouldn't have voted against more homes being built in our economy and in our communities. If they really cared about cost of living pressures, they wouldn't have opposed the Health Minister's plans for cheaper medicines in our communities, Mr Speaker. As I said before, they are long on nasty negativity, but they are short of anything which even remotely resembles a positive plan for the future. We are getting on with the job of rolling out billions of dollars in cost of living relief and cleaning up the mess that they left behind.
The Treasurer's time has concluded. I give the call to the member for Kennedy.
PM, your Great Inland Highway halved transport costs between Victoria and North Queensland. 92% of Australia is depopulated to under 1 million people, with no fire stick farming, no grazing stewardship, first Australians' land usage gone, 72% sheep gone, 23% cattle gone. Could you and Minister King call tenders for Ewandon's water conservation wind solar scheme, HIPCO, which would turn it and 15 other dying towns into rich, thriving, energiser communities? In spite of your humility, won't this make you the century's Jack McEwen, Ben Schiffler?
Concluded. The order. Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the member for Kennedy for his question and for his diligence in advancing the interests of his electorate. He has a long-standing concern about water security issues and opportunities in that region, and I visited with the member for Kennedy on a number of occasions and looked at the Hewandon irrigation scheme. I reckon I've been to Hewandon more times than anyone in this chamber except for the member for Kennedy, and that is because it is such a critical area for our future economy. This is a proposal that's been developed by HIPCO. The project would provide around 11,000 hectares of irrigated agricultural area. However, there are some steps that must be taken before it can be construction ready. A sufficient water allocation must be obtained from the Queensland Government, and Infrastructure Australia will need to assess the business case. The Queensland Government wrote to us to consider funding for pre-construction activities, which I can tell the member for Kennedy we have now delivered. I will, of course, engage respectfully, as will the Minister for Infrastructure and indeed the Minister for Water, on this issue about the project and its associated infrastructure. We are spending some $750 million on Queensland water infrastructure projects. Paradise Dam near Bundy in Queensland, Cairns Water Security Stage 1 project, Mount Morgan Water Supply project, strategic planning for improving water security in Queensland, additional funding towards Big Rocks Weir in Queensland, and groundwater improvement and water efficiency in the Lower Burdekin in Queensland. In total, we're investing over $2 billion in water infrastructure. We are investing in the sort of projects that the member for Kennedy has advocated over a long period of time, and we're certainly investing in Queensland. I look forward to continuing to work with the Palaszczuk government, including my Minister for Infrastructure and the Minister for Water, to make sure that we can make a difference, just as the renewable energy projects I visited with the member for Kennedy, including, might I say, Big Kennedy and Little Kennedy, not named after the member for Kennedy, but important projects nonetheless. Important projects nonetheless, as well as, of course, the Kidston Dam project and others as well. This is an important part of Australia that can certainly produce more. It produces a lot of wealth for this country, but there is an opportunity to expand further, and I look forward to working with the member for Kennedy to achieve that objective.
The call to the honourable member for Paterson.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How is the Albanese Labor government working to take the pressure off Australian families through targeted cost of living relief? And what obstacles has the government had to overcome to provide this relief?
The call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Paterson for her question. Now, since coming to government, Labor has been working for the Australian people every single day. And of course, we know that many people are facing challenges with the cost of living. And that's why we've taken action to help relieve that pressure. It has been our top priority. In the May budget, we announced our extensive cost of living plan to provide support to help millions of Australians doing it tough, but of course without adding to inflation. And Speaker, that support is now flowing and making a difference. In my portfolio of social services, since the House last sat, I'm pleased to advise that from the 20th of September, we've seen many income support payments being boosted, and they've started to flow to people's pockets. We have lifted payment rates for single parents, renters, older Australians and those who are unemployed or studying. Of course, for older Australians now eligible for the higher rate of JobSeeker, they've seen an increase of $109 a fortnight. And for the 60,000 single parents who have moved from JobSeeker to parenting payment as a result of this government's decision to expand access, these parents are now receiving at least an additional $197 a fortnight. And of course, we've now introduced the largest increase for Commonwealth rental assistance in the last 30 years. And for those on the base rate of JobSeeker, this has meant an increase of $56 a fortnight. Now, of course, the Treasurer has aptly outlined all of those initiatives that those opposite have tried to block. But he did miss the fact that those opposite also tried to block the increase to the base rate of the JobSeeker in the Senate. They wanted to deny those most vulnerable an increase to their base payment. And this is just another example of the Leader of the Opposition always saying no. His endless negativity, if he had been successful, would have denied support to those who need it the most. Of course, we have a plan to ease the cost of living pressures across government. Our election commitment to expand eligibility to the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card means that 20,500 more retirees have this card and have access to cheaper health care. We've delivered enhanced and more flexible paid parental leave and soon to legislate the scheme to 26 weeks. We provide energy bill relief and, of course, reduce the cost of medicines and tripled bulk billing incentive. It is our government that is firmly focused on cost of living pressures for Australians, and we will keep delivering.
Call the Prime Minister. I've called the Prime Minister. The manager may just take it easy. Call the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask for the questions to be placed on the notice paper.
And I call the Prime Minister on a dog.